So, hello, welcome to another JUXTCast. I'm not even sure what season it is. I definitely don't know what episode it is, but that doesn't matter. We're here with Jeremy Taylor, me, Malcolm Sparks, and a great special guest, Jean Kim. Jean, welcome to the podcast.
Malcolm, Jeremy, so great to be here, and it's good to finally meet you after years of watching your videos and Jeremy interacting with you on Slack, the Clojure and Slack for years as you were helping me get up and running on XT, XT1 many years ago.
Yeah, so that is a real connection between us all. That you're a fan of Clojure. So why don't we just start with your, I know that you founded a company called Tripwire, so and you were CTO there. But do you want to just let the audience know a little bit about how what the intervening years were like between Tripwire and how you kind of discovered Clojure?
Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah, in fact, maybe just to go back, maybe just to motivate why the Clojure discovery was so important to me. I got my, I was actually trained as a computer science person. I got my undergraduate and graduate degree in computer science, but I was there. I was at Tripwire for from '97 to 2010, and so that was actually based on a independent study project I did at Purdue University with Dr. Gene Spafford. And so there, I was primarily responsible for three things, right? Working with engineering and marketing on roadmap, right? Working with the sales force, and also helping elevate the visibility of the company and myself. I'm very grateful for the Tripwire experience. But I actually, I probably wrote my last production line of code there in 2001, or no, 1998, if I'm being honest. And so, it was actually, um, primarily C and C++. And back then, Malcolm, I'm not sure if you remember, but G++ wasn't out yet. C programs would make
Oh
fun of C++
man,
because it would take 10 seconds to exit
yeah,
because of all the destructors being
yeah.
called. Um, and so I missed the whole Java revolution. I missed the whole Lisp side of the family tree of programming languages. Um, and I stayed that way after. In 2010, I started working full time on getting the Phoenix project out, which I'd been working on for almost a decade. And that was a continuation of a journey that started back in 1999, studying high performing technology organizations. And so that's as measured by high project due date performance and development, great operational reliability and stability in ops, and also great posture security and compliance. And that's where I kind of stumbled into the DevOps movement. And so, the Phoenix project comes out in 2013. Got to work on the DevOps Handbook in 2016 with Jez Humble and John Willis, Patrick Dubois, and others. I worked on the state of DevOps research. That started in 2012 around like really quantifying, what are the practices, what's the value of being a high performer? What does a high performer look like? What are the behaviors that, predict performance? But it wasn't until 2016 that I started coding again. And it was actually, I give my heartiest thanks to Mike Nygaard, also in the Clojure community, for teaching it to me. It was a really tough, hill to climb, right? But I remember Mike Nygaard showing it to me, and I think he was also showing me Datomic in 2013, and I just didn't get it. It didn't look like code. It was incomprehensible to me. Anyway, so that reintroduced the joy of coding back into my life, and I, especially these days, in the last couple of years. With things like coding assistants, I have never had as much fun programming as now. It's such a great time to be in the game, and I do almost all my stuff in XTDB version one still. But yeah, it just took a lot of the pain out of working with databases. And I'd given a talk at ClojureCon in 2019 about how I've had this almost lifelong fear of MySQL that was really learned through pain and regret and suffering and so forth. How am I doing here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lovely thing to hear that, especially with so many people panicking about AI and junior, being a junior programmer and trying to get into being a programmer and feeling kind of that, all the jobs are going to disappear. It's great to hear that kind of positive spin that actually programming can be fun. You can be productive, and and that AI can augment you and make you a better programmer, and it's so accessible. It's so it is, you remember a time when you kind of had to buy, you know buy C++ compilers, and they were,
That's right.
expensive
Yeah.
things. So these stuff on to access these tools is pretty easy. I mean, of course, XDDB You can, and Clojure and Linux and all this stuff, you can get into really quickly and have an AI teach you sort of how to get up through the basics. So it would be good to hear a little bit more about. I don't know, Jeremy, if you've got any more questions around this yourself, but to Gene. But I want what it was. We saw your recent recent pair programming exercise with Steve Yeager, who's I'm a big fan of his early, his writing, and I think we're very much. I mean, we were talking about his essay about the kingdom of the nouns and the
Oh,
verbs.
right.
If you
Yeah.
remember that, which is a real kind of he's a real champion of kind of the Lisp way of doing, and a critic of Java. But can you just describe that? How did you get into that experience, and how did you find that whole experience of what you call chat oriented programming?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I met him. I've cited him so many times over the last decade in terms of his, legendary work over the last 20 years. Whether it was at Google or Amazon or Grab, uh, and so forth. And I had actually caught him on a bunch of podcasts talking about um, code assistance and so forth. And so I finally met him. It must have been around June, and we were just comparing notes. And one of the outcomes was he published a blog called "The Death of the Junior Developer," and it was based on this observation that I was just sharing with him some of the things I've observed. A friend of mine, he's like a managing director in a law firm, and so that's kind of all of the kind of strategy and operations functions in a law firm. So in like in academia, you have the department head, right? So that's kind of the highest functioning academic who sort of is nominated, to help run the department so that academics can do academic things. Anyway, so in the law firms, there's a similar role. And he said we're talking about. I was asking him how he's using LLMs because his clients are using LLMs, and so often that's resulting in clients never having to reach out to the law firms. And he said he's using them all the time, many times for things that he would ask an associate to do. Um, and so, like, boy, what does that mean for the associate? And, he said something. He said something kind of surprising. He said, he expects associates to also use LLMs, but kind of two things. One, they must declare it. Two is they must check their own work. That there's no one out there who's going to be checking their work for them. Right? It kind of reminded me of code review processes. And anyway, so it just kind of triggered a light bulb. And then Steve went on to his one of these kind of amazing, brilliant tears that he's kind of famous for. And anyway, to kind of force me to write up my observations. Anyway, it's just been beginning of a really fun collaboration. And so he gave a talk at a conference I run called the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit on kind of the future of coding, death of the junior developer, and so forth. And one of the things that came out of that was, I asked, hey, could we spend 2 hours just pairing together on a problem? And, the goal would be to sort of have him coach me in terms of like, all right, what does chat oriented programming feel like? And it was phenomenal. So the first task was, pick a problem, that we could, reasonably solve in 2 hours. And it was amazing. Basically the task, uh, so since January, I wrote this thing that uses XCDB for uh, almost 10 years. Whenever I listen to a podcast or a YouTube video, I take a screenshot whenever I hear something interesting. And the hope is that I would eventually go back and kind of like go back and re-listen and then write something about it. But I've I think I have like
So
something like
you
five.
take a screen when you hear something fairly profound or noteworthy or something. Hey, I want to go back to that someday. Is that what
Exactly, or
inspires
a
you to?
statistic or something that's just like really provocative or startling.
Okay, right.
And I know I took screenshots of your podcast when you're talking about like as you're sort of talking about like the value of XCDB and sort of like the design decisions you had made. Um, so uh, back in January, I just put the screenshot into ChatGPT and said, here's an image, extract the podcast name, the episode name, and most importantly, the playtime. Um, and over the years, over the last year, just kept on adding to that. So download the transcript, take the highlights and overlay them on the transcript, right, so that you can see them. And so I did something, that was kind of interesting. But I was like, gosh, wouldn't it be interesting to actually extract out the parts of the video, that so that you can actually make kind of a clips of the video, right? And so I was like, how let's do that, right? So the input is a video. the start and end times, and a transcript, and the output would be the video clip. And you know, I was amazed that in essentially an hour, 47 minutes according to the clock, we actually got it running. And I just know, having screwed with S5MPEG and wasted days or weeks of my life trying trying to get FFM parameters correct. It was just amazing that days, let's call it days, or a week of work turned into 2 hours. With chit chatting and joking around, and it was so much fun. I mean, it was just amazing, right? And so, like, the big lessons were, that as Steve is correcting me and coaching me, was you're typing too much, and often, as a person who uses a Vim bindings in IntelliJ, I associate, for decades, thinking with typing, right? JK, JK, just to me, that's thinking, right? It's just to get my hands off the keyboard, ask bigger prompt, give bigger prompts and ask the LLM to write more. Um, and yeah, just kind of really kind of understanding, gaining understanding of what LLMs, can and can't do, right? When there's a path that it's really good at, and there's a path that's, you're just doomed to iterate into oblivion. So anyway, so that was so fun. And it does, in fact, I think there's like four things that I would sort of quantify the value of this. One is I did it faster, right? So hours, not days. Um, you know, it was something that I probably would. That problem was something that, if I had thought about it, it would have always been a next month. This is not a good month. Maybe next month, right? So it took something that was like out of reach and made it within reach. Uh, Three is, like, I had more fun doing it. I mean, I had a blast doing it, which is not something I associate with FFmpeg, or, for that matter, MySQL. All right, it's just it was really fun. And I think another thing that I'm just learning is that, I think it helps you explore more of the design space, right? So it just opens up options, right? That so you can find the one-way doors before you go through them. Yeah, so I think it's important, and I think it's definitely a complement, not a substitute, as the labor economists say. It's not substituting people, right? It's augmenting people.
Yeah, it's interesting you said you mentioned searching the solution space. Jeremy, remember we had that conversation with Kent Kent Beck about the why do TDD, and I think he said something similar, that for him tests are kind of conversation with your code. You're saying, hey, can you get this test to pass? You're gonna can you do this? No, you can't do this yet because I haven't coded you, and so it's a conversation. And he was saying it was really about trying things quickly, getting to failure. That doesn't work. Let's try something else. So this searching the solution space really, really quickly and finding the best options. And we just had a safari from Jamie actually on chess, which I think we'll put online, but about chess algorithms. It was at lunchtime, and a lot of that is about uh, chess computers
Yeah,
searching the solution space really quickly and efficiently. So many times this idea is that there are some solutions that are lurking there, sometimes underneath your nose, that you ignore if you go with the first idea. So
yeah.
going broad is often a good idea.
Well, actually, just to nerd out for a second, that I think that's a really important idea. In fact, I loved Kent Beck's latest book. I mean, and I think it's so interesting that he is also sort of using the economics literature to sort of see if we can verbalize, some deeply held intuitions that we have in the software space. And so here's my take on it. I think what I've learned in the last 4 years, I worked with a guy named Dr. Steven Spear. So he's famous for writing the most widely downloaded Harvard Business Review article of all time, called "Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System," that came out in '99, which I read in 2001. And so it's just this amazing thing to be able to sort of ask the question: what is in common between things like Agile and DevOps, and Lean and the Toyota Production System, and psychological safety, and resilience engineering? All the things that now Murphy talks about. And the conclusion that we came to was that they are all incomplete expressions of a far greater but simpler whole, right? And there's just really kind of three mechanisms at work. But well, one of the things that Steve said to me was that his background is, economics, and, I guess, manufacturing, and then R&D processes. And he said, really, what economists have shown us is there's really three main ideas. One is the time value of money. So it's better to be paid now than later. Two is whenever there's uncertainty, options become more important. In other words, the ability to um, know what the options are but not commit to them, right? To be able to defer the decision. And three is the value of portfolios. It's don't ever put your eggs all in one basket. And so when Ken talks about um, exploration and options, what essentially there's a big belief that like the biggest economic lever is creating options, and modularity is actually a huge part of that. So Steven Spear's mentor at the Harvard Business School was a woman named Dr. Carlos Baldwin, and she wrote a book called Design Rules with Dr. Kim Clark, and it was actually the first kind of book that really explored why modularity is so important. And she studied the uh, design and and creation of the IBM System 360. So it was the very first time when you had sort of a family of computers that all were compatible with one, with a software binary. And so that's one form of modularity. But there's another form of modularity in the fact that it was the first time that they decoupled, port components of the systems, like CPU, memory, tape, keyboards, terminals, whatever, right? And Because before that, it was always a highly integrated team where everybody had to talk to everybody else. And so in this $20 billion US, today's dollars program, it was the first time that these engineering efforts could all be done independently, which was a massive success. But she also observed that all of the unexpected side effect was that all of the kind of engineers who worked on these various parts of the system all left IBM to form their own startups like Control Data, Unisys, Seagate, etc. And by 1980, um, the sum of the market caps of those companies were larger than IBM itself. So, as she said, it created so much option value that it blew the company and the industry apart. And so, sorry for this kind of segue, but it's like this wonderful description is, it's like in the old, before the 360, you had one roulette wheel that you could only spin once a year or whatever, because no one had independence of action. But by breaking the system into modules, right, each one of those modules is a roulette wheel that can be spun independently of each other, right? And so it's this huge unlock in terms of your win conditions, right? One big roulette wheel versus 1,000 little roulette wheels that you can actually spin more frequently. Anyway, so uh, all of that is a function of option value. So when you say exploring a design space, right? I mean, I think that is this huge unlock of value that can only come, through. It's not going to come through portfolios, or it's not going to come from just doing things faster. How am I doing?
Yeah, exactly. I was at Kent's talk in Go to Copenhagen just in September. So if anyone
Oh,
wants to watch that talk, but he starts off explaining about the Tidy First book that you alluded to,
yeah,
and it's actually Tidy First question mark. But I think I'm not sure
yeah.
whether he says if you're ever going to rename a book, if you're any kind of budding authors, never put punctuation in the title's name because there's some sort of uh, Library of Congress kind of limitation on punctuation or something
Oh,
for registering your publication. It was quite funny when he mentioned that, but he got to this by learning about options pricing and
yeah,
writing some options prices themselves. And so here's one of the takeaways from the book Tidy First question mark is when should you tidy? So I just read the book thinking, I bought the book and thought on the cover, well, of course you've always, this is Ken talking. He's going to bound to say you've got to refactor everything to the nth degree before you write any code. I mean, that's XP, right? You've got to type. No. I mean, his takeaway is that you tidy. The choice to tidy and your decision to tidy should be based on, does it have value? And one area of value is, does it create options? So, and he
yes,
explains why that's valuable. I used to talk about another very very similar around the modularity thing. I used to talk about the BA45. I think it's called BA45. It's the bayonet light fitting that we have in the UK and across all of the um, countries that used to form part of the British Empire. It might not be BA-45, but it's a bayonet fitting that we used to have on bayonet rifles in the British Army. And after a lot of the kind of expeditions, there was just a lot of these things lying around that were broken off, and they were good quality metal and things. And that because the invention of a bayonet was, we can go talk about how efficient that was. If you're in close quarters combat and you can exchange, you can quickly put a
Interchange.
knife interchange
Yeah.
into,
Yeah.
onto your bayonet fitting. It's very, very useful. You're going to get a chance to stab the person before they stab you, and it's kind of like life or death to do that quickly. So that bayonet fitting was really well designed for very quick, and so they turned it into a light bulb fitting. But it meant because it was already a standard, it meant that you already had an interface between light bulbs. But what you got is a huge industry of people writing light bulbs. They didn't have to make the lamps and the bulb itself. You could have a whole industry of people competing to create better bulbs, and a whole industry of people competing to create better lamps. And of course, the net result is that you got those multipliers. So there's a good kind of historical uh, uh, example of
Really? Wait, wait, just to make
options.
sure I understand. So basically, the BA-45 um, interface was replaced with a something that is compatible with light bulbs,
Yes,
um, to leverage the entire industrial base of light bulb threading, both on both sides of the interface. Am I understanding that correctly?
yes. Only I think it's B22. I don't know.
Very
I don't know. It's a
right.
B something, right? But yeah, there is a code for it, but it's a bayonet light fitting. But I don't think you have them in the US. I think they're screw light fittings. But the bayonet light fitting is very, very fast. If you need to change a bulb in under a second, use a bayonet fitting.
That's so interesting. Yeah, that is, I love that, and maybe just as a little uh, kind of observation on this. I mean, and so tiding is really, I think, kind of cognitively difficult, right? I mean, just I'm wondering, I remember, I mean, I know, like how many times I looked at a piece of code, I'm like, oh, that's kind of gross, right? In fact, I was looking at something where it's like rendering something. I'm like, I have two ways to render it, and there's no really nice to extract out the common bits,
Yeah,
but like, not today, not this week, maybe next week. I had this experience using, in this case, it was a GitHub Copilot workspace. I've used SourceGraph Cody, which is where Steve Yegi's at. But I mean, it's so amazing just to copy the code, into whether it's ChatGPT or whatever, and just say extract out the common bits, or give it a namespace and say extract out some functions and put it somewhere else. And it just picks a name. That's the reason, often it's like coming up with the name of the namespace is difficult, or coming up with the name of the what the function is. It just does it for you, and I cannot tell you, it sounds so pedestrian and trivial, but the feeling of just having something do it for you is incredible. Right? And so it's like, even the kind of the the act of tidying that, we should do. You can just ask the LLM to do it for you, right? And
yeah.
is it perfect? Maybe not, but I mean, is it does it make you do something that you otherwise would not have done when there is like a net positive economic value? It creates option value. Yes, it absolutely does.
That's really, really nice to put that kind of economic foundation on the chop way. But one question I have for you is, because when I looked at the video, I thought, wow, I can relate to what you're doing, because you're getting the LLM to suggest stuff like the path to your database, and you were saying, oh well, let's test that. Let's just chuck it in, and you know, and you had Portal for the Clojure audience. You were running. I think we've had a Safari on Portal, and so to what extent was the experience of Chop different because you were already in a conversation with the REPL? Because Jeremy and I were talking about this kind of REPL-based programming. Was it enhancement? Would it have been very different if you were working in Rust? I guess not, or some other languages. But do you think there is some kind of complementarity to using a REPL based language, and the messiness of real life, and having to try things out and search a solution
I
space?
think so, right? I mean, one of the things that it wasn't one of the primary motivations, but what I'm hoping that people see when they watch the video is like, oh my goodness, everything's just sort of at hand, right? And I've actually fallen into this maybe not great habit of I just put defs in the middle of my functions just so I can inspect them later, and I,
Yeah.
I rarely take them out. Right? I mean, I've watched other people like in their recordings. They're like, okay, we'll put a little def here, and then they take it out. I'm like, why bother? Right? But yeah, the specific I I can't imagine doing that. In another, I'm sure maybe the JavaScript people can do that. I mean, it appears to be a pretty dynamic, you know, um, and yeah, I guess maybe in Python notebooks, people do that too. But I'll be honest, I don't know, don't care.
Yeah,
But
I'm ill-informed. I'm not a Python programmer, but I whenever I watch people doing it, or I've tried to do it like that, it's just never the same. It's
yeah,
like it's not quite the same, and I can't put my finger on why it's not the same. But yeah,
and to
unless
your
you've used,
point, Steve recommended me do something that I just thought was absurd. Right? I had this, uh, after talking with like Christoph Newman and the functional design and Clojure podcast people, um, kind of there's a style of programming they do where they just pass around these big maps of they call it the big bag of data, right? And so, and it's that's been amazing because I guess the way I used to program was that I would always extract what I needed and then pass that around, and then some weeks later I'm like, oh, I need something else, right? And I have to go all the way back and put it back in. It's like now I just carry this huge bag of data around, including the original data that was untransformed. But so there's a part in the video where I'm looking for the transcript, and this huge thing is like it's a map of like the episode, the highlight, and it goes from podcast to episode to transcript to text, right? And I'm just trying to find where's the text. And so Steve sees me mousing around in Portal as I'm sort of like traversing this, the tree explorer, and he's like, "This, don't do that. Just copy the whole map into an LM and ask it to find it." And I just thought that was such an absurd idea, right? It's like um, I just it never occurred to me. And so it turns out that when the big bag of data was so big it sort of blew out the Claude and ChatGPT context window. But Gemini, could actually you know accept this 122,000 token bag of data, and the prompt was give me the path in this big nested map of the transcript, and it almost found it. I mean, it's just it couldn't quite get the namespace keywords correct, but you know, uh, how cool is that? Just give it a bunch of data, and it knows how to find it. That's incredible.
yeah, it's horrifying to me to think that you're pair programming with somebody, and I've been so used to somebody saying, "Shouldn't we write a test?" And now it's, "Shouldn't we ask an LLM?" And that's the admonition now when you're pairing with
Yeah,
somebody. But going back to that kind of, you mentioned big bag of data. So Jeremy, we were having this conversation where the ultimate big bag of data we think is the data is the database, isn't
yeah.
it? And really what we're doing when we have these big closure maps is it's a surrogate for actually a database that is something that. And Jeremy, do you want to talk a little bit to that conversation we had?
Yeah, well, I mean, the optionality thing plays into this a lot because I think if you look at the original reasons why databases were created and engineered, yeah, back in the 60s, even the late 50s, people were looking at how do we structure data. It's all about increasing optionality so that you're not having to get the data in the right order for the application you have to hand. You want to plan ahead and know that you're not shooting yourself in the foot and preventing yourself from accessing it from other applications later. So databases have always been about that, and database modeling as well has always been that. So relational algebra, Codd's model for normal forms, all these things, they're all about. If you do a sufficient amount of tidying, then you'll be able to find stuff easily. But if you don't tidy, if you let things decay into first normal form and just have big documents in your database, you may still be able to find stuff. It's just going to take you longer, and you can get LLMs to help.
So
But yeah,
databases, just to drill down into that point, they were the ultimate form of defer commitment when you talk about lean and stuff. They were saying, we don't know what queries we're going to need in the future, so why don't we just
Right.
map it all out relationally? And because we've already, you see mistakes now with people going back to key value stores and they're encoding all these things into keys, which means that certain queries are really fast and certain other queries are impossible. Whereas the relational database takes a very pragmatic, well, let's make things possible in the future that you might not have thought of. And I know there's limitations there, but I think that was Jeremy, that was kind of the idea of the relational model, to make queries possible that in the future to support long evolution of your applications, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the relational model is I had I think it was Andy Pavley describing it as like the most flexible thing there is. Like that, you can't everything can be modeled in the relational model. It may not be efficient, but you can make it work, and there's some beauty in it because it's just sets. I mean, from a Clojure's point of view, it's like the best way to program. It's declarative and just sets.
Yeah, like
But yeah,
everything's a map, but yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
can
But
I?
go for it.
Yeah, can I add one more thing that kind of, I was actually talking to someone somewhere. It kind of resurrected a memory of, in some ways, this kind of this app that I wrote using XDB is it's just a big. I said ETL pipeline, and he said, "Don't you mean ELT?" I was like, "Oh, yeah, of course, right." I love that Rich Hickey quote. The only thing you can do to data is ruin it, and that just resonates so strongly with me, right? I mean, in my 2019 ClojureCon talk, it was about this book tracking application where a bunch of I ruined a bunch of data because when I actually went to go retrieve it, it was a bunch of nil data. It was for like tracking sales rank on Amazon, and I mean that was just it's one of those things that kind of changes you, right? It's like, all right, from then on, I always stored the raw data. I dumped it into a Google storage bucket. Um, but I think kind of the lesson learned that I carried with me from there was, as much as possible, just save the raw data, right? Carry that around in the big bag of data, store that in XTDB, and just dump stuff there. As transformed as little as possible, and so that I can retrieve it later. And so 100%. Yeah, it's a really interesting observation about relational databases, and I guess I had not been fully aware that that as was relayed to me. The ETL versus ELT battle is still going on in some places, and I guess my interpretation of that is some people just haven't learned the lesson of like having ruined their data enough, and just having enough of regret and uh, and what are those emotions? Regret, sorrow, anger, right?
Yeah,
Where you just
denial. Yeah, I have worked in many places, and certainly in financial services, where you have a stream of systems that seems to only mutate and ruin data as it flows downstream, and so things eventually become, go from kind of a stream that ends up in sewage, and that's what downstream we call downstream systems have to. In London, the River Thames starts off very nice and pure water, and it ends up going downstream to the East End and gets polluted, and so we have metaphors for this. But the interesting thing about that you when you talked about just store it raw, and I do want to, Jeremy, just want to bring back kind of a point that we realized with XDDB is that we kind of feel that just putting in data and storing as arrow files in object store. And so just to explain to people who may not know, that JUX database XDB version 2, and I know you've got a lot more experience, Gene, with working with version 1, but version 2 stores all of its all it's a columnar database, so all the columns basically sit in object store, and instead of having these expensive processes to say, let me extract the ELT or the ETL, the E of those things, of extracting all the database from an operational database and putting it into another database with another model, and then extracting from that, and all. It's really
perfect.
a case of, here's some raw, just take the raw files, take the columns, do what you will on your own processing, and that seems a much more cloud friendly and really way of not mutating the data, just letting these columns just live as they are, as kind of as things that people can take and people can process, but trying not to tinker and tamper with data as it goes down this mythical stream.
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, just to react to that, I mean, it just occurred to me while you and Jeremy were talking about is like the instant you manipulate the data in a way that you've lost information, that is often is a premature um, decision. Right? In other words, you've destroyed, the you've taken away the option to be able to retrieve that data, which is, I guess if you have perfect knowledge, that's good to do. But I mean, if you don't have perfect knowledge, uh, then that was actually a pretty foolish thing to do, especially if you can't get it back.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when we look at these systems, we see over and over again that the actual meaning and interpretation is in applications and is lost in applications. It's in these black
Ah.
boxes, and therefore they consume data of certain columns and they spit out other data, and the transformations are embedded and encoded into these black boxes, and you never get to see them. So that's another that's part you might lose the knowledge, or the knowledge might just be so difficult to access because it's
Right.
encoded in Visual Basic scripts in spreadsheets and things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. Right. So at the minimum, you should preserve the option. Right. You shouldn't destroy the option. Right. That's actually a very bad thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So anyway, what are your thoughts for the future, and kind of what do what are you building at the moment? What's your what and where do you think you're where are you going to spend the next 2 or 3 years building or working on?
It's interesting. I've actually been thinking about that for the last month, and yeah, it's all about this option value. I just think it's really interesting. The Kent book, Tidy First question mark, is um, I just find it interesting that a lot of people are now sort of looking to economics to be able to articulate something that has been very difficult to articulate before. And more recently, just kind of stumbling into the Gen AI and coding space, just seeing how option value comes up again. I mean, just to give you a concrete example, I was listening to Simon Willison's an interview that he did. So he's the inventor of the Django framework in Python, right? And so he's just so interesting to listen to, and he mentioned this practice of using the ChatGPT app on a phone in voice mode while walking the dog. He says he's coding while walking the dog, and I just thought, I thought that was so interesting. So I did something similar, where I wanted to um, kind of, all right, once uh, the code that I wrote while pairing with Steve, that made the writing the videos pretty easy. The long poll then became like writing the text to accompany the video, and so I wrote this thing to basically take the transcript, and I asked the LLM extract all the facts, which is super interesting because it actually made it kind of mechanical to like be able to assemble the summary. It was I felt like it was like a 2 to 3x lift in terms of like making the writing easier. And then I actually say I extract the fact and give me the exact quote. Actually, then the cleaned up quote, right? Take out the ums and the uhs and the repeated words, and that just made it so much easier. Because it just went from something that was like kind of big and would take hours to something that I could start doing it kind of in a more mechanical fashion, and it was fun, right? I was like I could spend more of my time reacting about why something's important or why something is interesting. Um, and But I was like, okay, I got tired of. It seemed like the HTML text area just seemed limiting. Like, wouldn't it be great if I could sort of like just kind of copy paragraphs or put buttons but next to each paragraph, and then be able to do some manipulation of the text that way. But you can't do that with text areas. So um, I opened up ChatGPT voice mode and I said, "Give me the here's what I want to do. I'm trying to write a writer's workbench. Give me some React editor frameworks. And what I care about is like it should be the data model should be like very immutable, right? No mutation in the object, whatever. And it recommended like code prose mirror slate and something something. I'm like, okay, tell me about each one of them. And while walking a dog, I was like, right, give me what the um if I want to write an outliner or I want to have buttons next to the text, just describe what the code would look like. Right. Didn't actually read it to me, but I'm, for whatever reason, I chose Slate.js as the way to go. But so in that hour, right, I felt like I explored you know a, a significant design space and made a you know somewhat informed decision. Right? I mean, I don't know a lot about the other two, but I'm pretty happy with the choice I made with Slate.js. And I think that's another example of what Ken's talking about, right? It's like you were able to explore more of the design space, even while walking a dog, with AirPods in. And it was so interesting. So um, I compare and contrast that to the work that I got to do with around the state of DevOps research with Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble. And so that was a cross population study that spanned 60,000 respondents, and I was involved from 2013 to 2019. And that's where kind of the Dora metrics came from. This notion that great software delivery performance looks like high deployment frequency, short deployment lead times, high change success rates, and low mean time to repair. And we know that is predictive of organizational performance. To what degree are you achieving or exceeding profit share, market share, and productivity goals? Are you achieving your organizational mission goals? But that was just by looking at.
So you're saying there's correlation between economic success, market share,
Yeah.
share price, or some metric or economic success, and there's some of these DevOps goals, because
Oh
obviously
yeah,
you want
absolutely.
want to prove that there is a correlation between, if we're releasing early and often, does it actually have a bottom line effect, or just
100%. In
yeah,
fact, we would
yeah,
say
okay.
it predicts organizational performance. Not all of it, but it is a significant predictor of organizational performance. And incidentally, right, another organizational performance metric is to what degree do people recommend their organizations as a great place to work to their colleagues and friends? So that's the employee net promoter score, right? So if you can't build, can't test, can't deploy, can't get logs, can't get whatever, right? It's like that's not a fun place to work, right? So we know that there's a very tight correlation or predictive nature between those things, and that's just by looking at the part of the value stream from code committed through integration, through testing, through deployment, running in production. So, which is obviously an incomplete view of the software development process, but important, right? And I think that's where the majority of our work has been, with the exception of architecture. What we're talking about, the topic that we've been talking about today, is everything upstream of that: research, design, ideation, development, right? The structure of the system, the socio-technical system, and I think that's an exciting space to explore, right? So if we know that you can get there faster, you can often do the work yourself, so you can obviate the coordination cost that comes from working with other people, let alone other teams. You can explore more of the design space, and you can have more fun doing it. I just feel like I have this moral certainty, right? That is going to, be an even bigger predictor of organizational performance, right? So, everything before is necessary, but not sufficient, right? And so, when you take into the research, design, ideation, development space, I think that starts to form a pretty complete picture of the work we do as developers, right, and as technologists. So that's something I'm thinking about a lot, and I just feel like, uh, in a way that we haven't seen in a long time, there's this new technology emerging, right, around these LLMs that can help developers do that easier, faster, better, right, in a way that's a complement, not a substitute. Although it's a star, right? I mean, um, I think it does help senior people maybe more than junior people, but uh, on the other hand, like when you have an infinitely patient coach and an infinitely patient teacher, I mean, explain to me how that's bad for junior people. Anyway, so that's a long answer to your question, Malcolm, but I'm just dazzled by there's got to be something there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I was just reading a post, I think, that about that. We'll put it in the show notes, around the difference between a substitute and a complement, which is
Yeah.
something you put on Twitter, I think, fairly recently, about some of your sort of observations about working with LLMs. But does it augment the? I mean, are you substituting somebody, a human, with an LLM, or are you actually finding that by pairing them together, you get the sum is greater than the parts, that you kind of the developer works more quickly in a smarter way, is able to explore the solution space quicker, and actually that becomes a very fruitful relationship and
Yeah.
augmented. So that's very interesting. The only, again, I suppose it's more of a footnote, but Jeremy and I were working, I think a couple of years ago, we put some podcasts out about us trying to wrangle with Slate as well, because we went
Oh,
through the same same thought process of actually, when it comes down to it, a lot of things need to be uh, a lot of the times you're dealing with data in the form of nested structures. It might be a document. And
mm.
so I know when Jeremy first joined Juxt, actually, Jeremy had a project in Clojure script, which is he was putting his entire life in a document or an outliner, and writing a
I've heard
forum
about
or
this. Yeah.
Jeremy, would want to say what that was if I completely misrepresented it?
No, well, so it's kind of the dream, I guess. It's inspired me for the last decade or so, which is yeah, just about better organization of knowledge and how we share things around. Like I was kind of horrified entering the world of work, seeing how everything was driven by spreadsheets and email, neither of which are particularly accessible to automation. Maybe that's changed now with LLMs, but yeah, I sort of got very driven by this knowledge graph sort of thinking, and that's what led me deep down into database modeling, because ultimately it's all about optionality, and I could never sort of decide what the final data model was going to be. So MySQL was out the door straight away, and things like Datomic and DataScript were very appealing. So yeah, that's what drew me into Clojure. But yeah, the idea of like an outliner being like a very useful interface, and you're saying for your writing workbench, um, yeah, I think outliners are underrated. Most applications, have nested bullet points and things, but they treat it as like a dumb block. And the art of having a text editor that can have an outliner where the components of the outline are actually bits of a graph, like that's what everyone really wants, isn't it? Where the things in the outline are first class references to disparate bits of knowledge, and you can pull in and surface things. So yeah, we didn't get too far, Malcolm, with our Slate.js, what was it called, card UI.
Yeah, it was
But
all online. But the idea of being able to edit a document and put it back into a database and share it, in a temporal way, to see all the different versions, to be able to link to bits of your document. You might have a fantastically profound point which is in a bullet point in a document, and you can't link to it if it's a Word document somewhere. You can't just as you want to link to those snapshots of those YouTubes that you've seen. Want to sometimes you want to um, be able to highlight something in a document and link to that and say, oh, that's a great thing, and that links to this other thought over here, and so the ability to create a knowledge graph out of in your database, which we think is an old idea, but actually one that has some pertinence nowadays, when we're dealing with the very general large language models that have been created outside our organizations, and they're super good at what they do and reasoning, but they even better when you can augment them with facts about your organization. But how do you retrieve those facts? And there's the RAG process of populating your context window of your prompt ahead of time with lots of pertinent, useful, interesting context. And and we think that that's a very good way of building these systems, that you need to have a database that have your facts easy at hand, that you can query. So that's why we kind of feel that your knowledge graph really is your database, and your knowledge is really a set of facts over time. So we're really trying to double down on this kind of idea of just put it in a database and then build lots of applications, some of which are AI enabled, on over this kind of shared collaborative data, many of these rows will be documents that you want to edit in Slate.js and then put back in the database. But so that was, it would be interesting. Have you ever, do you have any kind of thoughts on kind of knowledge graphs, and as they meet LLMs, and you particularly with working in DevOps, which is a very data intensive, there's a lot of configuration data, and
Yeah, I don't consider myself an expert in this at all, but I have friends who are just there's really interested in, like, how do you create these kind of knowledge graphs to augment an LLM, and suddenly they're talking very much like Rich Hickey, and the semantic triples, etc. I think that's super interesting, makes a lot of sense to me, but I would claim no area of expertise on that. But I mean, I think um, there is this wonderful freedom. I guess what I learned plunging into Datomic in 2018, 2019 was the liberation from the rectangular tables. I mean, just I didn't realize how constraining that was, until I saw what it could look like without that. And I don't even think had I used MongoDB at the time? I don't know, but I mean, it was just I didn't realize just boy until you felt that, right? Just um, I didn't realize just how constraining and dangerous it was, because often in the act of creating the rectangular tables, you lose something, or at least the way I did it, lost something.
Yeah, I kind of look at it now that those, um, if it's done to an extreme, rectangles are, most things are small nested documents. Most of our atoms in business are these tiny little documents, but actually, it does help to put them in sets where they're all the same. Medical record is, you have hundreds and they have certain things in common, and then being able to query across them with SQL. And so, the nestable, records, I think, which is something that we've paid close attention to. I know we had it in version 1 of XDDB, but that was only a data log. That only had data log syntax. So what the trick that we're trying to pull off with version 2 is to give data log and SQL access, first class SQL access to all these tiny little documents that are sitting in your rows, and rather than rows, they're really kind of records of small documents, and that's yeah, that's fun, and we're I think the result of what we've achieved is very nice. It's taken a lot of design work and a lot of exploring lots of the solution space, but I think we've kind of more or less pulled that off, and um, that's something I think is because I agree with you. It's very, very constraining when everything has to be made as tables.
Well, by the way, when I saw some of the announcements of version 2, I mean, it did strike me as a revelation, because I mean, I'm always amazed at how many people can write SQL, and how proficiently. I'm thinking about like the person who does our creates the Looker dashboards for charting various metrics. I mean, this he's writing better SQL than I could, and he can spend hours doing it, creating amazing graphs, and I could never imagine asking him to learn data script or write Clojure code. So I think that expands the possibilities so often. I've been dying to ask you. So you know uh, let's assume this is a perfect success. Is a part of you sort of inside? Does that I don't want to say sadden you, but like on a scale of -10 to 10, like how do you feel about what is your relative love of SQL versus the data script data log format? Negative. Is it um, +10 for SQL, or is it +10 for data log? And you have to sort of put yourself on a chart. Is it zero, meaning like you're net neutral in terms of one versus the other? Deep down.
So me personally, I learned Datalog properly more than I really spent time working on SQL. Like, but by the time I learned Datalog, I realized, yeah, I'd never really engaged with SQL enough to really understand that I didn't know SQL very, very well. Like, and you see this actually, a lot of people have a very surface level of understanding of SQL, but there's a huge amount of depth there. And each engine, of course, has, a lot of features which a lot of people don't know about, right? There's this case where 80% of people use 20% of features. Um, so Datalog is wonderful because it's simple. There's like 10 things you have to learn. It can get very complicated to reason about. And I think SQL has this advantage that if you have like a small question to ask, it'll be a small query normally. Whereas a small question in Datalog can actually be quite a complicated Datalog thing to express. But broadly speaking, I'm actually like much more favorable about SQL than I was 3-4 years ago because I spent more time studying it, understanding how it succeeded, and looking at how people cope with it. So, like Sean Caulfield's HoneySQL, a fantastic library, makes working with SQL very pleasurable. Like it just turns it into S expressions, and at that point, you're looking past that sort of 70s COBOL-esque syntax, and just seeing it for what it is, which is relational algebra, more or less.
Yeah.
It's got some obscurities, and maybe there are better things that you could tweak about SQL, if you didn't have to worry about backwards compatibility. But broadly speaking, it does quite a good job. Um, and the thing you learn about Datalog, the more you look at that, is that what Rich Hickey showed us with Datomic as Datalog is not the official Datalog, like Prolog Datalog. And the way academics talk about Datalog is it's like a series of extensions, because like the most basic Datalog doesn't even have the ability to work with numbers even. So like you want to start working with all these different kinds of literals and functions. uh, it becomes something which isn't even really defined, and at that point you basically end up in the same place you were with SQL anyway, where it's like, yeah, it hasn't got a strong mathematical foundation, or at least not one that everyone can agree on. So yeah, my view on SQL is actually very optimistic, and I think LLMs actually get an awful lot of SQL right first time. I think that
Yeah.
that idea of SQL being a compilation target is more and more practical as the years roll by.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the LLM thing, and also the industry knowledge of how to solve problems in SQL is vast, and that also means that we can think of SQL as a protocol, and so we've been able to,
There
for
you go.
example, there's a Clojure project called Metabase, which is another thing
Hmm.
in the Clojure ecosystem, really fantastic project, open source, that just works with Postgres driver. You just configure it, and it just works with XDDB. So that's a really big nice to have if you can
That's
plug
super
in those.
cool.
You know,
It's like the bayonet fitting, right? It's the light bulb fitting,
it's the
right?
bayonet
Now
fitting.
everything can
Yeah.
talk to everything knows how to talk to SQL. By the way, what is the name of the bayonet? Is that BA45? It's called a what?
No, I think it's B22. I mean, it is
B20
slightly older than
bayonet
SQL.
bulb.
Mm,
Ah, yeah.
and that,
Oh, that makes so much sense. That
bayonet. We call it a bayonet, but there is actually a, a kind of an industry code for it. But it's a
yeah, I
bayonet
see
fitting.
that.
But it's in Australia, Canada, I think, parts of most of India. I think it's very
Right.
common. I think they're phasing it out now, but it's been going for 200 years or so. So it's or more. It's older than SQL, which is. But
Yeah. So if I hear you correctly, you're saying regardless of uh, what your opinion of one versus the other be, the economic value of looking like any other SQL database might eclipse
yeah,
all
that
of the other concerns, which actually
well,
sounds very, very compelling to me.
although I'll make a counterpoint that we sat on the fence actually on this for a long, long time. We had plenty of design meetings where when we had good arguments for keeping Datalog. We wanted to keep the Clojure community happy and the people who had been using V1. We wanted a good kind of a story, and so we have a thing called XDQL, and we have a thing called SQL, and the by holding those two things as options meant that we tidied. The tidying of the 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 database query engine meant that both compile to the same intermediate representation, which means there's kind of a bytecode for expressing a query which is lower than both. Which I think when you talk about options, one of the options that is dear to my heart is that one day because we have a data log compile a data log like syntax, we could support something like Sparkle, which is the kind of semantic web query language, and that has parts of, borrows things from SQL, borrows things from Datalog, like the kind of the logic variables, but that that it wouldn't, by keeping things tidy and supporting multiple languages and supporting things like unification in Datalog, is that you can then build a Sparkle parser on top, and you could open your database to the semantic web community. So I think there's an economic value in just
Yeah, being
deferring to
preserved there
yeah.
and enabled. Yeah, it is what is. I'm sorry, I'm thinking about the exact definition of an option. It is the right to, but not the obligation,
Yeah,
right? To
that's it.
do a certain thing. Actually, I think I know what the question I was really trying to ask, and I think I'm asking kind of based on reading, so much on the Clojure and Slack channel and the XTDV channel. Like, is your internal representation, does it hew towards? I think I was really trying to ask is like, in terms of the query planner and so forth. Is it internally? Is it look more like Datalog, or does it look more like SQL, and it sounds like neither. It's something
Well, it's a
even
query. I
lower
mean,
than both.
it's yeah, it's a query plan that says this is how I'm going to scan this. I mean, Jeremy, you're far more qualified to answer this.
Yeah, so it is uh, it looks like Clojure syntax. It's Eden. There's vectors, and yeah, there's these operators. So things like scan, join, uh, negate, or whatever. Like there are these. I want to say about 11 or 12 operators, and some of them are ones we've not invented, but like they're not what exist in like the SQLite planner or like Postgres, but they're ones we found that are necessary for the kinds of things, the operations we want to do.
Yeah, they're like the kind of like eval and apply of Lisp. They're kind of there's 11 relational algebra operators that you need to write, a query plan, and that's So I think anybody who's spent time with database would recognize what those things do, but they're low level, of course, and that's post optimization. So you have a, I mean, I think there is a, isn't there? We generate a query plan, and that then gets further optimized. There's some decorrelation and some aspect, and then you end up with the final plan, and that tells anyone debugging, these are the files that I'm going to look at. And so if there's any kind of optimization problem, then you look at the plan, and the plan is a kind of Eden object. But that's under the hood. But it's nice just that we didn't burn our bridges with any potential, like GQL as well, which is an ISO standard now. There are other, and Cypher, and there are quite a lot of different ways of querying data, and it's nice to remain more or less future proof.
Super cool. I love the idea of like put options ahead. That's super super interesting. Actually, I do have a selfish question now. And so if I've spent like years building on top of XDDB1, like what advice would you give me in terms of like migration? Like what would a migration to XDDB2 look like? And even in terms of like how I write my queries, right? Like what advice would you give me? Right, take more of a honey SQL style, or keep writing in sort of like the data log style.
So I mean, I think that the quantity or the volume of data is definitely a factor in in what you're trying to do, and not like the latencies you need for the queries. So um, internally, it's very different. The query API surface is very different as well, but the core ideas are the same. So you have these big unstructured or semi-structured documents. All they have is an XTID and then a load of keys, and we don't really care what those keys are in version 1 at all. In fact, we implemented like using Nippy, which takes anything that has the Java serializable method and will serialize it and store it in XD happily. Version 2 is a bit more restricted than that, so it has to fit within our blessed arrow types. But what we've kept is this same idea. It's semi-structured records or documents in V1, call them records in V2, and we version those over time. And so that the fundamental model is the same. What is different though is that we now have tables. So in version 1, you just had one single universe of documents, and we did index those in a universal way, so that the triples in the indexes were just the top level keys and values. In version 2, because we have tables, you have to make a decision. Are you going to stick everything in one giant table? And if you only have a few thousand rows, maybe that's fine. And if you only have like a few dozen columns, having everything in one giant table is absolutely a way to do things. But what we actually found, a lot of what version 1 users were using keys like type, and they
Right,
had their
right.
own sort of type key, right? So it's like, well, then what's the difference between that and a table? Why not map those one to one with a table? And I think a lot of the the problems with rectangles, as we talked about earlier, is because the classic SQL mindset encourages you to be very strict about exactly where things are and how data in the database gets changed. And a lot of that is born out of the fragility of the data that's stored, because when you change or update the data or delete the data, it's gone. And so you have to be very confident about exactly what is where. Whereas in an immutable or temporal database, you shouldn't really have to care that much. If you get the table slightly wrong, you can move things around and make compatibility in the application, or maybe create SQL views to hide or paper over any mistakes you made in your data layout. So what I would say is use SQL, because I think it's more first class. You'll have a better experience at least for the next few months. This is if you want to do it the next few months. We actually have a design partner program, so we're working with users in Python and TypeScript and well outside of Clojure now, which is really good. We're getting sort of a healthy amount of interest from people with real, what I'd say, temporal reporting problems. They struggle with building reporting on top of applications, and they're all using SQL. So for us, the SQL API is the number one priority right now. I think in a year's time, XTQL, great, we'll have more time for that, and I'd like to boot that up again, but obviously we're a small team. Got to stay focused. If you want to pair on that, maybe we could do a 2-hour programming, migrating your knowledge graph.
Oh, sounds good. I may take you up on that sometime soon.
Perfect.
Well,
That's super.
We're drawing, kind of running out of time, and so I want to draw things to a close, and really to thanks a lot, Gene, for joining us. I know it's early where you are, and it's been a really interesting conversation. Really loved it, and I hope that when I'll be watching this, I'll be taking little snaps as I go along of some of the points that we've made, and I can use your technology to get the snippets back. So who knows? Have you got any plans to make your your workbench more available, or is it open source, or is it a sort
Not
of a
at this
private
point. I
hobby
mean, I think
thing?
it's really meant for me. But who knows? Yeah. By the way, I mean, it's just it's kind of the signal I'm looking for is like how much is this helping, and would I be willing to do the work without it? And I'm getting, I feel like I know what that feels like. Is I was once on I think last year I was on a transoceanic flight and the Wi-Fi cut out, and I needed to write something in Clojure, and like the Copilot wasn't working, right? So it's like, close the laptop. I don't want to do it by hand like some sort of savage. I did a piece of like narrative business fable, like the Phoenix Project, Unicorn Project. I was working on with someone, and just it was so amazing to be able to copy and paste some parts into Claude and say rewrite this, less showing, more telling, get it to do some changes, and it made me. I wrote. It made me feel like a movie director, not a stupid script writer. I mean, it was like it took all the sort of like tedium. It was just you're operating at such a higher level, and I want to do that with kind of the writing with nonfiction, and I feel like I have a hint of what that might feel like. And so right now it's just for my own personal use. But my personal observation is that I'm writing more. I'm having more fun doing it, and like in terms of like production volume, right, which is a kind of terrible thing to measure, but it's like I'm writing 10 times as much at least than I would have before, right? Whereas just the effort was so high that I just never either didn't finish it, gave up, or or something. Yeah. So I feel like just having felt that, I just want to make that more possible, more sort of writing scenarios for myself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I think it's a really fascinating area, and for people listening who kind of a little bit worried about the future of AI, as I said in the beginning, you like, it may be that AI is going to take all our jobs away, and so on, and people might be right, but then again, you might be wrong, and this might be the right,
Yeah.
a wonderful time to get into programming, especially with the fusion with AI, the experiences that we have as programmers, a sort of early front seat at this revolution. We get to kind of influence it and play with it and benefit from it and see how it's going to pan out. So I think it is a fun time to be alive, and definitely a fun time to sort of dig into and lean into this new technology. It does definitely feel like we're in the middle of a revolution, and that can be fun, and
Yes.
so it's really lovely to hear how you've kind of got a kind of positive spin, and you're really enjoying technology.
Yeah, I think I would maybe I would say that's the most important. Is does it make your work more fun? And no, every dimension that I can think of, the answer is yes. And then the other things are just side benefits. You also get it done faster. You can do things yourself. You can explore more of the design space. But ultimately, right? Would you be willing to do this work without it? And increasingly the answer is like, no, no, I'll just wait until it comes back.
Well, we'll finish on that. We'll definitely check out the show notes, and we'll put some more links there. Thanks everybody for listening and to another episode of the JUXTCast. And I want to just say, thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Gene Kim.
Right back at you. So great to be on, and keep up all the great work.
Will do. Take care.